Hello everyone, thanks for coming to the channel. So, this video actually really ties into the whole point of what I'm doing here, i.e. utilizing social media. Um, I use social media a lot. I use Facebook a lot. I obviously use YouTube a lot. So this is directly relevant to my experience as a creator. Um, and it also kind of taps into how I look at my possible future in terms of being a creator, in terms of using the site. Which I'm not stopping. I'm not saying that, but definitely there are things that have been going on in sort of recent months regarding social media that does give me some question marks as to well, to put it plainly, it's made me quite cynical about how these platforms are run by the people at the top. So hopefully they're not going to punish me for this. Then it would be kind of dictatorial, like you know, you must submit to. It just feels like So yeah, if anyone from YouTube is watching this, I'm simply speaking to my personal experience as a creator. And I would ask you to please take it on board as constructive criticism rather than being hostile about it. Because after all, the thing about social media sites, whether it be Facebook or YouTube, um, probably someone like me is a very, 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 very small keg in the machine, right? Um, so it's probably creators that have millions of views that YouTube really cares about. I'm not convinced that they do particularly care about the little guy like me, because if they did, they wouldn't force us into a corner, and it's very frustrating. So I'll start with YouTube because that's this, and then I'll talk about Facebook. And I do apologize for the slightly cynical tone of this video, but I think it's important people understand from the point of view of a creator, because sometimes subscribers have asked me, why don't I monetize? Why don't I do this or that? And I appreciate the gesture. I appreciate that that is your investment in in liking my content. So I really do appreciate that as a suggestion. But the reason I don't is because I was actually monetized for a while. I didn't see anything from it really. I think it was pretty much nothing, because the amount of content that I was putting out, or rather the amount of views that I was getting, simply didn't add up to anything significant coming through. So it's barely worth counting. Um, but basically, what I found that this was about, I guess it would have been about 6 months ago now. I can't remember exactly, but they started making creators um, kind of self-regulate their own content. So if you're monetized on YouTube, it basically means that advertisements appear in your video, and every time someone watches one of those advertisements, you get a small fraction of the money. But like I said, in my case, it was barely anything. It's not worth talking about. Um, so I wasn't really seeing much benefit of it anyway. But if I was getting millions of views or even thousands and thousands of views, that would be different. But my videos average perhaps 50 views. So yeah, it just wasn't making much of a difference. Anyway, this like self-regulation, or I forget the exact terminology that was used for that, but basically it meant that in order to monetize, you had to define your own content. So, for example, I talk about socio-political issues. Some of them are controversial, right? Um, so if I'm talking about something like Black Lives Matter, or feminism, or Islamism, you name it, a controversial, debate-worthy subject, okay? Which I do. That's always what I've done. I've always spoken about those things because I find them interesting as a discussion format, or as a subject to cover. I don't do comedy. I don't do these sort of travel vlogs or something, which is great. I like those sort of things. Well, travel vlogs, for example. But I don't do it. This is what I do. So they put this ridiculous. I mean, that format was infuriating because I'll give an example. They would say, "You hateful content." I'm thinking, well, of course my content's not hateful. But then you would look at the subcategories, and it would be like content that talks about a minority group but in a non-hateful way. Well, that's an obvious contradiction. It's either hateful or it's not, right? But that's what they would do. Every category was contradictory to itself. So I found it very, very hard to self-regulate in that sense. Not because I was being stubborn and that, oh, I don't need to regulate. It was that it was legitimately hard to think, well, if I put my content in this category, they're labeling it hateful, which it isn't. Controversial, maybe, provocative, maybe, but it's not hateful. I'm saying, for example, I disagree with some of the rhetoric and approach of Black Lives Matter, but I don't hate them as individuals. Um, I mean, this is a frustrating thing. As a creator, hand on heart, I can say I have never shown graphic content. I've never pushed reckless conspiracy theories. I've never threatened anyone. I've never, spread hatred of a minority group. I've never done any of that. And yet, an honest creator like me gets forced into a corner this way. Very frustrating. So I think that the people at YouTube, I've seen a little tutorial on this, and it's tone deaf. It doesn't listen to the feedback. And this is something that I find is true of social media networks in general. They've got so big. I mean, they're like empires. They have in the case of, I don't know what the precise figures are now, but certainly both YouTube and Facebook have over 1 billion users each. I think Facebook might be approaching 2 billion, but they're huge. They're a sizable portion of the world's population. So these are huge, huge. I mean, think of it this way: if YouTube was a nation state, it would be a superpower. It would be on par with India or China as a nation state. So a rising superpower, anyway. I mean, so it's a David and Goliath situation. You feel as a creator who gets an average of 50 views and has 1,800 subscribers, which I hugely value, but I am a low level creator. Um, how can I stand up against that? If I try to make an appeal, I recently spoke about the negative experience I had where YouTube actually sanctioned me for 2 weeks. And again, anyone at YouTube watching this, that sanction was grossly unfair because they sanctioned me. This is the irony for doing the exact opposite of what they said. So basically, they accused me of spreading false information related to, I'll just say it, um, anti-vaccine conspiracy theories. I was actually criticizing that. I was criticizing those anti-vaxxers, and they had this message saying, um, this violates our community guidelines because it goes against the advice of local health authorities. But if they bothered listen to the video, they would have seen I was supporting local health authorities. I was criticizing the anti-vaxxers. Yet they sanctioned me for that. Incidentally, my own position on sanctioning conspiracy theories, I've mixed views about it. On one hand, I've no respect for those sort of theories. I think they're dangerous. I think they're disrespectful to people who've lost loved ones. But sanctioning them kind of only galvanizes the rhetoric that they're brave, you know, people standing up against these big monoliths, and I think that's it's not true, but I think that it only galvanizes that sort of victimhood rhetoric. Um, I think it's better probably to just confront them and challenge them and expose their lies in that sense rather than anyway. So I'm thinking you're sanctioning a guy who has done nothing but criticize a conspiracy theory, and you're now accusing me of spreading the conspiracy theory. So this said to me, they haven't bothered listening to this. Maybe they've went by the title. I don't know. The video is gone because it had, that was the offending video. Um, but I just feel that YouTube is tone deaf when it comes to, creator feedback. I filled in one of their questionnaires. Of course, it gets ignored. I'm not convinced that they listen. Um, I appreciate that they might have limited staff, right? So they might have a few thousand people working for them and they have over 1 billion users. So I accept it's going to be impossible to absolutely regulate everyone fairly, but there should be some common sense. And forcing creators into a corner where they have to define their own content in a way that isn't accurate, where you're telling creators label your own content as hateful if they want to talk about something controversial that isn't hateful, it's simply, provocative. Um, they don't seem to realize that they're forcing creators into a corner. Yeah, I've seen some stuff online that gets thousands, millions of views, and in my opinion, it's toxic. I would argue certain drill videos are toxic. I would argue they glorify gang violence, but they don't get sanctioned. So there's an inconsistency there. So in the case of YouTube, it's like, on one hand, I'm grateful for the platform. I mean, I'm not paying anything to do this. I'm just voicing my opinion. And that's, something that it's, I don't want to say privilege, but it's a good thing to be able to voice your views to the world. And, okay, I don't get that many views, but anyone can listen to this if they want. That's a good thing. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that. But I also feel that in recent months it's been heavily curtailed. So I do think there's a freedom of expression issue here. Now, if YouTube wants to see itself as a publisher because content is being published in that sense, then they should be upfront about that. Rather than have these mission statements saying that we want to give people this platform to express themselves. I don't know. I just think that the way it's done, I feel that creators are being pushed into a corner. And I wonder, does anyone else feel this way? If any of my subscribers, if any of you are creators yourselves, have you had this problem? I mean, maybe your content's different from mine. Maybe you just talk about cooking or music or something like that, which I guess is less controversial than my content. But I never show anything graphic. I never threaten anyone. I mean, really, is it sensible that I should be sanctioned? It's frustrating, very frustrating, because I don't want to stop making videos, but if there's further restrictions, if it's like I have to walk on eggshells around every single thing I say, then what's the point? I think there is a freedom of expression issue at stake here. And I appreciate advertisers don't want to be associated with people who are making hateful content, right? So if you have someone who's being explicitly racist in their video or explicitly sexist, and it's done in a non-joking sense or a non-humorous sense, because some people have a strange sense of humor, but it's so very important to define these things clearly, and that's one of the biggest problems of YouTube. I don't think they've clearly defined this. I think the definitions are poorly worded, contradictory, and yeah, they just force creators into a corner. So that's my frustration at the moment with YouTube. But I'll continue doing what I'm doing so long as subscribers support me. I do think the situation would be different if, as a starting point, if I was viral. I think, it's good for them to have viral creators, so they'd be less likely to kind of push me into a corner. That's why I think it's a David and Goliath situation, because I think it's a low level creators like myself who are being penalized, and it's unfair. Um, Now, moving on to Facebook. Um, There are issues with the settings on Facebook at the moment. I mean, I keep getting spam messages for any subscribers who use Facebook often. I get spam messages from people I don't know. Often it's frankly, promiscuous girls who are, to put it politely, showing their assets in a promiscuous way, and they think like I'm interested in that just because I'm a guy. Well, yeah, I like an attractive girl as much as an ex-man, but I don't want to be spammed with this rubbish. And it happens all the time. So I changed my settings so that only friends of friends could send requests, i.e., people I had some connection with. But I'm still getting this rubbish despite changing the settings. What's that all about? Um, I think there's a lack of consistency. I know I have personally reported posts, and I'm not in the habit of just, oh, I don't like this, so I'll report it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things that really, really shouldn't be there. People who are making threats, for example, clearly engaging in bullying, um, or propaganda outlets. I mean, I personally don't think that the Chinese and Russian governments should be allowed to pump out their propaganda on Facebook, particularly the Chinese regime, when it blocked Facebook in China. Why should they be rewarded by putting their propaganda on Facebook? I don't think that Xinhua, Global Times, CGTN should be allowed to push their anti-West rhetoric on Facebook when Western media, including Facebook, is heavily, heavily curtailed in China. It's not a level playing field. So I don't know what Mark Zuckerberg thinks that will achieve. Like, will it soften the Chinese up so that Facebook get into the Chinese market? I don't think so. That if that's a strategy, it hasn't happened so far. Um, so that's absurd. I do not think the Chinese nationalists, if they're going to push propaganda, um, at the very least, they should be challenged. At the very least, when the Chinese Communist Party spreads lies online, for example, lying about their concentration camps, they should be penalized heavily. That's not happening. Russia Today gets to spread its propaganda, even though it's often based on conspiracy theories. Why? Why are they not penalized? So, another example is Islamists. You get posts that are viciously anti-Semitic, pushing Islam's propaganda, and nothing happens to it. I know I've reported some of that stuff, and I get a response from Facebook saying, "You done the right thing, but this does not violate our community guidelines." Now, here's the problem: there is a lack of consistency. Paradoxically, more conservative or right-wing or centrist voices in the West have been sanctioned, sometimes deservedly so. I mean, there was the whole thing about Donald Trump. I have to say, I've not a huge deal of sympathy for Donald Trump because, he is in a position of such power and he's abusing that power by spreading lies and propaganda, conspiracy theories. So, this idea that Donald Trump's a big martyr for free speech, I don't really buy it. The problem is, rather, the lack of consistency. Now, had Facebook or, well, I guess it was Twitter, but had Facebook, for example, taken down Donald Trump's posts, but also taken down the posts of the Russian government, the Chinese government, far left sources, etc., if they had shown consistency, then I would say, okay, well, that's fair. At least they're showing consistency. But this is the problem. They are not consistent. They're not upholding the same standards to everyone. That's a big problem because it then leads to people believing, well, this is just a left wing source. And left wing viewers might disagree with that. But as a centrist, I do think there is a bias in these big social media companies. I do think Facebook has a bias to the left in terms of how they arbitrate community guidelines in that way. I do think there is empirical evidence to show that there is a lack of consistency. And again, I appreciate that their limited staff can't police everything at the same time. But if someone has reported something and they have clearly looked at it and they fail to act, and that subject is clearly violating community guidelines, but then someone is sanctioned over something really trivial. I mean, for example, there have been Facebook members have been sanctioned over sharing Muhammad cartoons. Now, on one hand, that is insulting to millions of Muslims, right? But why is that sanctioned yet Islamists actively threatening non-believers or endorsing ISIS or other vicious terror groups, why are they not sanctioned? This is this makes no sense. At the very least, there should be consistency. That's all. That's all I would ask for. A consistency. So that's the problem. And I do think it feels like I mean, Facebook often makes changes without doing a sort of survey with members saying what we think of it. So I think these big companies are sort of complacent. They think, well, so much of people's lives revolve around social media, and I confess I do spend a lot of time on social media. Some people sort of say, well, oh, I don't need it, I can quit. That's fine for them. But for me, if this is what would happen if I closed my Facebook account, I would suddenly lose a connection to all my friends in other countries. Okay, there's a small email possibility, but not everyone uses email these days. It takes longer. It's not as convenient, as opposed to going to social media. So yeah, that would not be a simple thing to do. I can't just shut down my Facebook account because I'm tired of it. Um, because it would mean cutting off all those ties. I do feel recently that I'm going to reassess how I approach Facebook. I'm going to try and spend a bit less time on it. I'm going to try. YouTube, I'm going to continue what I'm doing, but I do feel somewhat cynical about the way these big social media companies use their power. I think they're inconsistent in the way they sanction people, in the way they, for want of a better term, police the content. There's an inconsistency there. I think there is a common sense deficit, i.e., my experience with YouTube. It's just nonsensical. Um, so I don't know. I don't know what the sort of situation is. If they've seen droves and droves of people leaving, if that's the case, they need to have some humility and think, what are we doing wrong here? Why are we losing users? I think it's been probably consistent whereby they've lost users, but they've also gained users. It's probably like that at the moment. We're at a point now with Facebook. I'm of a generation. I'm an older millennial, so I remember a time without social media, and my generation's growing up with Facebook. What's interesting is we're going to get into Generation Z, and they're going to be post Facebook. They're going to see Facebook and YouTube as archaic, which is incredible. My little niece is 9, and her brothers are even younger. When they're my age, Facebook is going to be ancient. It's going to be like, whoa, that's what you guys used back in the 2010s, back in the 2020s. So that's interesting. But one thing in general that I would just leave as a concluding thought, and I know nothing's going to change from this video, but it's just as my thought as a creator, and maybe subscribers will agree, the fact that these networks are so powerful, the fact these websites are so powerful, they have to remember that without the users, without creators, they wouldn't be what they are. So I think they need to show a bit more humility and start listening to people. They do these periodic surveys, but do they act on them? I don't know that they do. I think they need to start using common sense. I think they need to be more consistent. And I think they have to realize that it does look like an abuse of power when they do this, when they act arbitrarily, inconsistently in this sort of way. It's very, very frustrating. Um, so again, I apologize for the cynical overtone of this video. I don't want to do that, but I'm being honest, this is my experience. So let me know your thoughts, particularly if any of you are also creators. Have you had a similar experience? Feel free to share your anecdotes in the comment section below. I'll try and do a live stream soon, but I don't want to put precise time on it. Maybe later. Well, no, I'm not going to put precise time on it because I don't know. But I will plan that fairly soon. Hell, I might do one today if I have time. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts.